Welcome to Climate Change and Health in Small Island Developing States focused on the Caribbean. If you require translation into Spanish or French, please use the link posted in the chat and choose your desired language at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You should continue to keep this browser open as well to utilize the chat and Q&A features. Please be sure to scroll down and mute the video. Please use the Q&A feature to submit any questions for the speakers. This session is being recorded. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel on creating a climate change informed and educated health workforce. We are delighted to have you here today. We're going to be discussing how we equip health professionals to address the effects of climate change and the impact of climate change on the health of their patients. And we have three wonderful speakers who will discuss quite different models for engaging health professionals in climate change work and education. And of course, we'll be talking about training and capacity strengthening as well. Let me introduce each of our speakers in turn. Our first speaker is John Kocher, who is a research assistant professor at George Mason University's Center for Climate Change Communication, where he conducts research on science, environmental, and risk communication. He focuses on how do we get people to engage and how do they respond to public engagement by scientists, and how do we effectively communicate the public health implications of climate change and air pollution. He will be presenting multinational research on the views of health professionals and climate change and health. Welcome, John. Our second speaker is Christopher Ora. Chris is a professor in veterinary virology at the University of the West Indies. He has many years of research experience focusing on viral and protozoal diseases, and he will be discussing his work running a One Health-based research program and leading a climate change and health leaders fellowship program. Welcome, Chris. And our third speaker is Gypta Itawaki. She is a Surinamese Indigenous rights activist, a development worker, a politician, and a proud mother. She has had many roles and serves in many capacities. She's an interpreter of her language, the Wayana language. She has worked for the Surinamese office of the Amazon Conservation Team. She has been the spokesperson of the chief of the Wayana. She has trained as a field health assistant. But I think the role that she is most passionate about at the moment is her role as the founder of the Mullicat Foundation, which represents her peoples, and she will be discussing a community-based collaboration with health professionals. So thank you all panelists for coming. And to our audience, I look forward to an engaging discussion. Our plan is to have each presenter present in turn, and then we'll take one question. And then after all three presenters have spoken, we will have a lively discussion, I trust. So let me turn to John.
Just get my slides up here. Is that coming across okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Maya, for that kind introduction. My name is John Kocher, and as Maya just said, I'll be talking about a study that my colleagues and I conducted last year regarding health professionals' views on climate change and health. Now, when we talk about the climate-educated health professional, I think ultimately one of our goals here is to have more health professionals help inform decisions on how best to mitigate and adapt to climate change, whether those are government officials, corporations, other institutions, or individuals themselves. And certainly health professionals can engage with each of those audiences directly. But what I think this figure here does a nice job of illustrating is that health professionals actually can work with through a variety of different intermediary organizations in order to achieve those goals. And so certainly, I don't think anyone expects health professionals to engage through all these different channels in order to improve mitigation and adaptation decisions, but hopefully the engaged health professional can identify at least one pathway that works well for them. Now, to assess whether health professionals feel ready, willing, and able to engage in those sorts of actions, my colleagues and I conducted a survey last year in collaboration with the World Health Organization, the Global Climate and Health Alliance, as well as the World Medical Association, to assess the views of the memberships of a variety of different health professional organizations in a number of countries worldwide. You can see here on the left all of the different health professional organizations we surveyed. While I discuss the results, what I will draw your attention to here is keep in mind that a large proportion of our sample was composed of members from the Canadian Medical Association. And I will say that originally our plan was to ideally engage an equal proportion of societies representing adult medicine physicians, pediatric physicians, and nursing associations. Ultimately, most of our participants came from adult medicine associations. 95% of our sample was composed of physicians. Just one society was composed of pediatricians and one society of nurses. So despite our best recruitment efforts, we didn't end up in that sort of more representative place. So one of our initial research questions was just simply, to what extent do health professionals view climate change as a threat to human health? And certainly there's a lot going on in this figure here, but really what I want to draw your attention to is that majorities of our participants felt that a variety of different health impacts are already adversely affecting the health of people in their own country to a moderate amount or a great deal. And between a third to nearly a half of our participants felt that a variety of other health impacts were already adversely affecting the health of citizens in their country. However, when we asked our participants whether they thought that each of these impacts would become worse, more frequent, or severe over the next 10 years if nothing was done to address climate change, majorities of our participants felt that all of these different impacts would become worse over the next 10 years. So in addition to trying to find out to what extent health professionals think climate change is a current and growing risk to human health, we wanted to know, are health professionals willing to engage with the public and policymakers to raise awareness about this issue? And might they be willing to advocate for more ambitious climate actions? Thankfully, we found that an overwhelming majority of participants in our study felt that it was health professionals' responsibility to bring the health effects of climate change to the attention, not just to the public, but also to policymakers. And this is really important because in other research, we find that feelings of responsibility to do these sorts of things is an important predictor of action. When we asked them directly, would they be personally willing to participate in a global advocacy campaign by health professionals to encourage all world leaders to strengthen their commitments to the Paris Climate Agreement, 26% of our respondents said yes. Another 37% said they might participate in such a campaign, but would need more information first. Another 27% said they would be supportive of such a campaign, even if they couldn't personally participate. And only 10% of our participants said, no, they wouldn't participate in such a campaign, nor would they support it. So I think what this demonstrates is there's at least some evidence to suggest that a large proportion of health professionals in a variety of different countries are willing to at least consider engaging in such efforts, and a significant proportion of them are willing to engage in those efforts already. But what we know from many years of social science research is that even when individuals hold the best intentions to engage in certain actions, a variety of barriers oftentimes impede them from doing so. So we also wanted to ask, what barriers reduce health professionals' willingness to communicate about climate change and health, and what resources might be helpful in alleviating some of those barriers? So perhaps not surprisingly, we find that the most commonly cited barrier to communicating more with the public about climate change and health is a perceived lack of time. Next up is a perceived lack of knowledge, that they don't know enough about climate change and the health effects of climate change in order to discuss it. And about nearly 1 in 3 health professionals responding to our survey said they felt like it wouldn't make a difference even if they did do these things. And then fewer participants thought that barriers such as a perceived lack of support from their peers, a perception that the topic is too controversial, or that it's too risky for them professionally or personally, were holding them back from engaging in these sorts of actions. And so I think, going forward, thinking about a research or action agenda on how to address these sorts of things, these results really nicely illustrate some priorities that we might really target for additional research in terms of trying to develop interventions that are most effective, for instance, at addressing time constraints or perceived lack of knowledge, or the perception that these kinds of efforts wouldn't make a difference. When we asked them whether a number of different resources would be helpful in alleviating these barriers, majorities of all of our participants felt that things like continuing professional education on climate change and health, more guidance on how to make their workplace sustainable, action alerts on when and how to advocate with policymakers would all be helpful to them. And then importantly, I think, in terms of addressing that perceived lack of knowledge barrier, this next one is really important to keep in mind, which is that it's not just about helping health professionals understand the impacts of climate change to human health or the health benefits of climate solutions, for instance, but it's also about training them on how to effectively communicate those issues to a variety of different audiences and in a variety of different formats. Lastly, we found that a majority of our participants also felt that additional patient education materials on climate change and health would also be useful to these ends. So just to sum up, we found that health professionals do indeed view climate change as a substantial and growing cause of health harm. Many health professionals felt a strong responsibility to educate the public and policymakers about the problem, but a variety of personal, professional, and societal barriers impede them from doing more public engagement. And so I think moving forward, thinking about a research and action agenda, certainly given the composition of the sample in this study, it would be ideal to have a better understanding of how health professionals in the Caribbean region, where they stand and how prepared they are to take these actions, and what barriers prevent them from taking these actions. But I think there's probably likely to be enough similarity between health professionals here in the Caribbean and those that we surveyed in this study to at least start thinking about an agenda to develop more effective interventions to address some of these barriers, such as a perceived lack of time. That one probably is broadly applicable to health professionals everywhere. And so, we can start to talk about that in the Q&A. I think there are a range of different directions and ways that social scientists can help strengthen interventions to that end. I'll just end by thanking my co-authors for this study. This really was a team effort, and let you know that if you'd like to read more about it, it was published earlier this year in the Lancet Planetary Health. And certainly it wouldn't have been possible without the World Health Organization, the Global Climate and Health Alliance, the World Medical Association, and all of the health professional societies that participated in this research. Thank you.
John, thank you so much for that. That's a perfect backdrop, understanding where we are now and where health professionals are coming from now. We have one question for you, which I would sort of ask you to maybe begin an answer on. And the question had to do with response rate. Is it possible that the survey was influenced by selection bias, in which persons concerned about climate change tended to participate in the survey to a greater degree than persons not concerned about climate change? And maybe I would just expand that question to thinking about, did you get responses from countries in which they might, those countries might have experienced greater climate events or have more active discussions about climate events?
Yeah, it's a great question and one that we struggled with a lot in conducting this survey. I think it's certainly plausible that participants in this survey are probably more motivated and interested in the subject of climate change. So that certainly could be a factor driving response rate. But even if we did a sensitivity analysis and assumed that, say, the average respondent at these health professional societies was, say, only half as engaged or half as concerned as participants in this survey, I think we'd still find a significant degree of concern and high risk perceptions about the health effects of climate change. And in terms of other factors, I mean, I think it's so hard to disentangle to what extent it is the individual health professional society or the geographic differences and just the personal experience with climate change on the ground in those countries. Unfortunately, I can only really speculate there, and we don't have a way to definitively identify which of those factors might have been driving it. Keep in mind, the survey was also conducted between October and December of last year during the COVID-19 pandemic, before vaccines were widespread, and clearly health professionals have had an intense burden since the pandemic began. And I think it's safe to assume that that probably influenced response rates as well.
Well, you've anticipated a question I plan to get to during discussion about the impact of COVID. So hold your thoughts and thank you so much. And we will turn now to Chris.
Hello, very good day to everybody. Thank you very much, Maya, for introducing me. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the work we've been doing developing networks of Caribbean leaders or agents of change in climate change and health and in One Health. I'd like to start by acknowledging my colleague, Craig Stephen, who has been working very hard on this program with me. And I'd like to also say that this work has been a collaboration with many organizations, including PAHO, and the two particular projects I'm going to be talking about have been funded by the European Union. So what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to be talking about our experiences building these networks. I'm going to be talking about a little bit about what we feel that we're doing well, what are our successes, where we can improve, what are the lessons we've learned along the way, because I think that's important, and also the gaps and implementation barriers that we've come across that are stopping us from doing a better job. So these are the two programs that I'm going to talk about. A One Health leadership series that we ran, where we trained 29 One Health leaders from 12 Caribbean countries. And a climate change and health leaders fellowship program, which has just started, where we're aiming to train around 24 climate change and health leaders, professionals from 16 Caribbean countries. Now, many of you will know what One Health is, but just briefly, it is really a collaborative approach that cuts across the boundaries of animals, agriculture, that's soil and plants as well, human and environmental health. And it's all about recognizing the connections between the health of people, the health of animals and agriculture, and the health of our environment. And it's promoting partnerships, collaborations, and teamwork across disciplines and across sectors, so we can address these types of very complex problems like climate change from a multidisciplinary perspective. So these are the two programs. In the One Health Leadership Series, we developed 30 One Health leaders from 12 Caribbean countries, as I said, and the learning goals from these two programs are extremely similar, in that we're enabling and empowering professionals from different sectors. In the case of the One Health, this is on cross-sectoral issues in Caribbean countries, and in the case of climate change and health, this is within the context of climate change. The two programs, although similar learning objectives, were carried out in different ways. And as you can see here, the One Health Leadership Series was quite an extended program for 3 years, and it was face-to-face. So we actually trained 35 participants from 12 countries over 3 years through a series of themed workshops every 6 months. And throughout or between these workshops, there was the opportunity for the leaders to implement a nationally relevant One Health focused project within their home country, a learning by doing approach. Whereas in the Climate Change and Health Fellowship that we've just started, this is a part-time 12-month blended learning program. So we're training 6 fellows per year over a 4-year period from 16 eligible countries. And we have more of an online component to this. We have face-to-face workshops, COVID allowing, at the start and the end, and then various themed blocks, which are adaptable according to the needs of the fellows and what the fellows bring to the program. And we've increased the learning by doing elements to include a nationally relevant project, but also a workshop, a symposium in the home country, and spending a week in a CARICOM climate change regional agencies. So what are the successes? What do we feel we're doing well? We have identified clearly, and it's good to hear from this conference, that we've identified an important gap in empowering professionals, health professionals, to make change, and this is so critical. It's important with any adult learning program to make the learning fun and to try and create good group dynamics, because this is all about networking, making friends, making partners. From a context point of view, it's very important to have a regional country context. And in this way, we've had themed workshops in different Caribbean countries that are facilitated by local experts. And to tie the learning to real world issues relevant to the learners. This is so important for adult learning. And also giving the participants the opportunity to learning by doing, by carrying out national projects. This maximizes the opportunities for practicing what has been learned, and the opportunities for learning through shared experiences. And also the importance in professional learning is, of course, peer-to-peer learning, because the professionals that come to the program have so much to give. As regards challenges where we can improve, from the One Health program, this was 3 years long, which is quite a long length of time to keep people motivated and engaged for. And it was a big group of 35 participants that we had, which in some ways is good because there's lots of friendships and partnerships made, but it is a challenge because it's difficult to keep up with the individual mentoring and coaching challenges and meeting the learning needs and expectations of each of the participants. Also, it's critical with these kind of programs that the fellows or the leaders have sustained support from their bosses, because without this, they wouldn't be able to complete the program, which takes a considerable amount of time. And obviously with a long program like 3 years, this is more difficult because people move jobs and they move bosses as well. Also, maintaining the expectations post-program is always tricky and difficult. Because it's usually these programs are usually through a funded project, and when the money runs out, we all know it's quite a challenge to sustain the program and sustain the peer support network. And sustaining the program beyond the project funding period is definitely one of the challenges. We also have to think very carefully about the carbon footprint as well, face-to-face versus online. So applying the lessons learned that we've learned to this new Climate Change and Health Fellowship series that we've just started. So what we're doing is we're doing a blended learning program to reduce the carbon footprint as much as possible, but we are maintaining face-to-face workshops because that is critical for relationship building, which is so critical in these kind of network building programs. We really need to have a rigorous selection process with interview, because the selection process is so important that we select fellows who are highly motivated and preferably in a position to affect change. And we also can can select fellows so we that have have relevant contrasting skills and experience, and this really aids the peer-to-peer learning. We've gone for smaller groups, 6 fellows, to allow for more personalized mentorship and coaching, and a shorter program which is more manageable. We've expanded the learning by doing approach to include a national symposium where the fellows can build networks within their country through the symposium and through their national projects. Also increasing the frequency of teaching and learning interactions through weekly online sessions so we can keep the momentum up. And we have a very, very strong focus on peer-to-peer learning, and we have an adaptively managed curriculum, which, as I said earlier, is modified as we move along based on the specific needs of what the fellows bring to the program and also their needs. And critical is to bring in local and regional experts. So experiences are grounded in local realities. And my last slide really is looking at what are the gaps and implementation barriers. What do we need to know to enable us to do a better job here? The first one is are our fellows actually making a positive impact as an agents of change when they leave the program? Are there appropriate long-term behavioral changes? Do the competencies and attributes we cultivate in individual leaders translate into positive change? This is monitoring and evaluation and doing this beyond the program. And what the other important question is, are we doing things correctly? Are we doing things in the best way? What is the appropriate intensity, frequency, and longevity of leadership programs like this for health professionals? We need to understand what are the optimized programs, lengths, etc., that we should use. And finally, how do we cultivate collective leadership? We've talked a lot about collective leadership and systems change in this program, in this conference. How do we cultivate this type of change as opposed to creating just individual leaders in their own programs, in their own silos, who affect a program and policy change within their own discipline? How do we expand this out to collective leadership in the systems that we're working in? So these are really critical things we need to think about. Thank you very much for listening. Please feel free to download this excellent book if you want to know more about what we're doing. And I just wanted to say that the application process for the second cohort of fellows will be opening on November the 21st. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I have a question that sort of builds off one of the questions from our audience members, and I would just ask for a pithy answer here while Gypta switches into her slides. And the question from the audience was, how many of your participants did become effective leaders and engage in active change? And maybe my piece to that would be, it's always hard going from an exhilarating, intense, mentored learning environment to hitting up against the real world, as you say, resources, bosses, systems. How do people manage that transition in your observation?
It is indeed challenging, and maintaining that strong peer support network beyond the program is something that really needs to be worked on, because as you say, you develop a set of leaders or change makers. They're not at the end of this particular program going to be leaders, though. They develop into leaders beyond that, and you have to provide them that support to be able to do that as best as possible. So the question is very pertinent. You need to really, as I said, do the post evaluations and really look to see whether the leaders are actually making a true difference within their fields as they move forward. And that post evaluation is often the thing that's unfunded because the project's finished. So I would say many of our leaders are working and using the knowledge and skills that they've learned within their workplace and are developing into effective leaders. But we need to actually, really carry out the monitoring and evaluation so we can prove that that is the case, going forward.
Understood. And maybe the question for you and John to ponder, because I think there's a theme there, is system change, not just engaged and excited leaders, but system change. How do we get to that? All right, thank you for that. Hold your thoughts. And Gypta, we're ready to go whenever you are.
Thank you, Maya. Can you go to the next 2 slides, please? Yes. So I'm from Suriname. Suriname is a very small country in South America. We are part of the Caribbean, and today I'm going to talk about the climate change and the impact on the mental health on the Wayana indigenous people. I am an indigenous person. Next slide, please. For the ones that don't know, my territory is in the southeast from Suriname, where there is, and there are about 2,500 Wayana indigenous living in Suriname, French Guiana, and Brazil, and in Suriname only 800, and all of us are still speaking our native language. As you can see, Suriname is known as one of the most greenest country in the world. And if we're talking about climate change, Suriname is leading to warmer temperatures and more extreme weathers. As a relative poor country, its contributions to global climate change have been very limited, but because of the large forest cover, the country has been running a carbon negative economy since 2014, so that's a good thing. The Wayana territory, for example, consists of 3 million hectares, and it's mostly pristine forest. Next slide, please. Yes, this is just to give an indication when I'm talking about Wayana indigenous people, who they are. The next slide, please. So some of the challenges that we have when we're talking about climate change, what are the causes of climate change? Deforestation is one of the main causes of climate change. And as I already explained, is that Suriname is known as the greenest country in the world, and because it consists of 93% of still forest that they call pristine or intact forests. But the challenges that are happening right now, the causes of deforestation is, for example, illegal gold mining in the indigenous area. And this has caused a lot of challenges for us, which also leads to, for example, the food security, that our food sovereignty is also impacted by this. Another thing that is caused by the illegal gold mining, the deforestation, is also mercury pollution. And this is deforestation is causing the climate change. Next slide, please. Here I have some maps to give you an idea when I'm talking about how the gold mining, the deforestation that the gold mining is impacting our area and how it causes climate change. And this is only the square that you saw, that is 3 million hectares of indigenous land where the Wayana people live. And you can see here in yellow all the gold mining areas, and the red dots on the down left is the ones that are active in Suriname. And in Suriname, we also talk about fresh water, and you can see that the water is also impacted. So the quality of our water is also impacted. So what happens is, next slide, please, is that because of the deforestation, what happens is that there's a lot of flood and drought. The way that we are farming, the way that we are taking care of ourselves is not the same anymore, due to this deforestation, which is caused by illegal mining, also logging, because I've been talking about the gold mining, but also the logging causes that sometimes there is drought, and then forest fires, just because of the high temperature, it causes that, and also floods. and a lot of so the food security is not intact anymore. So these are some of the things that are happening. And when and I put these photos to give you an idea how it impacts us. Another thing is that what happens is that because there is no food security and because a lot of land is given away to do illegal gold mining, the Wayana people don't feel secure in their own territory anymore, which causes mental health problems for the youth. And they don't see a future for themselves anymore. So there's a high rate of suicide amongst the youth between the age of 15 and 25 years old. And that is a very young generation, that gap. What we have been trying to do as a community is try to work, for example, with the mission, the medical mission that is responsible for healthcare in the interior, and together with people like myself who are able to speak Dutch or English, because like I said, in my community, the indigenous people only speak their language. And when working with communities, you have to know their background, their culture, their tradition. You can just go to someone and say, hey, today we're going to talk about suicide, or we're going to talk about climate change, because some of these words don't tell us anything. So you need there are certain ways how you should engage with communities, and a lot of good intentions have been done in the past. Researches have been done in the past by organizations, also by the government, but it didn't went well. So what we are trying to do right now is that we from the community ourselves are trying to see how can we find solutions for the mental health and the impact that is happening right now. So some of the solutions that we have been finding is to see we are adapting, we have to survive. So how can we best make sure that we don't die of hunger, and how can we make sure that our youth don't stop commit suicide. So I have a little video that I can share next with you guys about some initiatives that we are doing in the community. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gypta Itawaki and I am the chairperson of the Mulokot Foundation. The Mulokot Foundation is a Wayana organization that was established on April the 13th, 2018, and we established this foundation to bring development to the Wayana indigenous people. The idea was to bring development from indigenous perspective, because development means something else to everyone. Also to the Wayana indigenous people, development means something else. So that's why we established the Mulokot Foundation.
Baru kemanati vaksinasi hirasi ketika mat mera uta kupta mana jamara panpira ani vaksinasi napa sirapta utara tuwana uta puna katong mana jalski.
Donc système mera mala kui tokong ani ngande butate kala wai tuare na butate no me akhirnya itu lagi netal teh kopiai. Oleh teh toko kosi.
The things that are important to the Wayana indigenous people, that is what we are working for, such as Kaumhakan is a village that is in a gold mining area, and there's a lot of pollution going on with mercury and everything. So one of the things that we are doing right now is, for example, fish farming, to farm our own fish that is mercury free, because the people cannot eat the fish here anymore.
Yes.
So this is an example, and these are the kind of developments that we are trying to do for the Wayana indigenous people. What we hope to achieve is that we have a 10-year vision document, and it is on our website. You can read it, and if you want to help us, please donate to our website. Thank you. Ipong Manay.
Thank you so much for that. One very quick question for you, and then I'm looking forward to a discussion. I appreciate that you brought in mental health and suicide into the discussion. I don't know if you want to say anything else about thinking about mental health impacts due to these both environmental and climate changes.
Yes, like I said, there's because of the deforestation, the climate changes causes, and things are not the way it used to be. You cannot go fish and hunting anymore. So this impacts them because your people are hungry. People are getting sick by the mercury pollution, and it causes a lot of thinking stress. So with all of these things, yeah, mental health problems. So that's why we have a very high suicide rate right now. But since we've been doing these projects there, doing things with the youth, we've seen that the numbers in the suicide also have dropped. So yeah.
That's lovely to hear. And it says something about the importance of creating a sense of self-efficacy and self-competence. So questions for our hosts, all of our panelists. We have a number of questions in the coming to you, but let me put maybe a question to all of you. COVID, do you think that COVID has changed the engagement or willingness of health professionals? Has COVID changed the potential for systems change based on the projects that you and research that you're involved in?
Would you like me to go first on that? I don't think so much changed it long term, but certainly short term. The issue, and John brought it up, is time. And the type of people that are coming onto our fellowship program, because of the nature of the subject, are physicians working within the Ministry of Health, you know, and they are extremely busy, more busy than ever with COVID. And we have a couple of physicians, one from Bahamas and one from Haiti, and they turn up at our online sessions with their masks on. They've just been vaccinating people, you know, they've been treating emergencies. You know, this is a you know, an incredibly difficult time for them mentally as well, because they're making massive decisions about, you know, in the Caribbean at the moment, there are major issues with hospitals being inundated with people, etc. So from a point of view of at the moment, COVID has affected us, but I think COVID will also have positive changes in some way as we move out of it, in the fact that it really does make people think about many of the issues we're talking about, the multidisciplinarity. I talked about the One Health area, the importance of people, of us working on these issues together, coming out of our silos. COVID really does bring that home, that, you know, these complex problems that need this multidisciplinary approach going forward.
John?
Yeah, so from our perspective, you know, our research center did some surveys of health professionals from a few health professional societies in America in 2014, 2015. And in terms of the overall pattern of results, I think health professionals in those surveys were still perceived climate change as a high risk, and there was still certainly a high degree of demand for additional resources that could help support them in becoming, you know, more outspoken about climate change. But I think Chris is right that it probably has only exacerbated time constraints. But I think, you know, some organizations have been really successful in embedding climate change related concerns in some of the discussions, for instance, about economic recovery packages to try and address, you know, the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So for instance, our collaborator on the project I talked about, the Global Climate and Health Alliance, has organized a series of actions both last year as well as this year to really sort of raise the salience and consideration of the health implications of climate change when various governments around the world are formulating these economic recovery policies. So I think it's probably both a challenge and an opportunity in some ways.
I don't know if you had any thoughts about how COVID has changed how your community is engaging on these issues, for better or for worse. Maybe it's highlighting the importance of thinking broadly.
Yes. The COVID-19 has certainly impacted the communities. I think on top of climate change and the gold mining activities and not being able to be indigenous and has the COVID on top of that has impacted us huge. And what happened is that we were really isolated, and most of the information that was needed wasn't done in our languages. So we had to take action for ourselves to translate this information into our own languages, so the people were aware of what was going on, because they were already only focusing on, for example, the capital, the Dutch, everything was in Dutch. So it didn't reach the communities. I think just the beginning this year, they started translating the information in the different languages, and then it was already too late. So what we did is that it was difficult to go to the villages, and also like I think Chris mentioned it, that the hospital in Paramaribo, they could only take so much patients. So whenever the people in the communities got sick, they had to stay there. There was no because of the infrastructure, planes are going by plane to take the patients is very expensive. So they had to stay there, and they were actually left there, and we had to see what we could do. So I think it made us more creative to see how we could use technology, even though we were not allowed because there was a lockdown, so we couldn't fly into the interior. We couldn't do our research and our projects and activities, but COVID made us really creative. How can we use technology to reach our people? And that's how we started with our own way, and a podcast radio, because internet is there. So yeah, that's it. Sometimes, like you said, it impacts it positively, but also negatively. So the positive side would be that we find a way to be creative and use the technology to reach our people. Yeah.
Well, each of you have pointed out rate limiting steps to assisting clinicians, health professionals in becoming effective system changers, which is what they want. You've identified time, technology, confidence. So maybe the last question in the last 2 minutes is, each of you, if you had your silver bullet or you had your magic wand, what would you do or recommend to help health professionals become effective system changers? And maybe we'll rotate in the same order that we did last time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. I think we need to, we really need to understand that leadership's not an individual, and it's a collective, and we really need to get across this systems thinking. And we need people to understand the system, what the system is, who needs to be involved in the system, and bring those people around the table, and we heard about this yesterday. This is whoever needs to be brought around the table to address the problem. So from an education point of view, it's we need to develop the enthusiasm. We need to expand the programs as much as possible to the different groups, because there are lots of different groups, as we've heard about in this conference, as much as possible. And try to really get them to understand this systems-based approach and how important it is, and where they're involved in the process, where they're involved.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I would really reinforce what Chris is saying. I mean, I think part of the key here is to convey that health professionals are not alone, that, as going back to the first part of my presentation, there are a lot of different organizations that they can work with in order to reduce some of those constraints. So if they don't know which policies are coming up for a vote or which policymakers that they need to contact, there are organizations out there that can support them in that effort and do that legwork ahead of time to shorten the amount of investment that they need to do that. But I think also importantly, coming at this as a social scientist, we need researchers to partner with those organizations and help them test, all of the various efforts, whether it's, long-term fellowships and things like what Chris is working on, to individual email requests that are asking health professionals to take actions. We need to rigorously test those things and identify what the most effective interventions are.
I love how you are both being optimistic, which is useful because there's so much discussed about eco distress and anxiety, even amongst health professionals. Gypta, though, you get the last word. If you had something a message you would like to deliver to health professionals about how they can effectively work with communities to create long-term systems change, what would you like health professionals in this audience to know?
In Suriname, we have the medical mission that is responsible for the health in Suriname, and they have done a really great job educating the health workers because they come from the different communities in the interior of Suriname, and they do really great jobs with the resources that they have, actually with which they don't have. So if I have a magic wand, I would give them the tool and resources to be able to do work more. I would only imagine what kind of great work they would do if they had the tool and resources, because without them right now, they are doing an extremely great job, and I'm so proud of them. And yeah, so that's what I would do. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, no one has gonged me yet. So Chris, any of our panelists, any last thoughts you want to share? Anything I should have asked you but didn't get a chance to do?
No, I think that's all. I think we've covered everything. Thank you very much for your
Let me maybe
chairmanship.
take away this idea that systems change requires collective action, and no health professional or community should feel like they have to do it by themselves, that there's resources out there. And I see you all nodding. So maybe so perhaps we will empower people to find resources and to work with others. And I agree, I always think that's the antidote to distress around these issues, or feeling overwhelmed or feeling depressed about these issues, that there's great solace in collective work. All right, I'll wrap it up here. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for such thoughtful presentations and thank them for such interesting and important and impactful projects and research. Good luck as you continue with those projects, and I have no doubt that you'll be getting emails and outreach from members of our audience who will want to work with you or engage with you in any way, or who will be inspired by what you do. So thank you so much for your efforts, and thank you, audience, for joining us.